SpaceX has performed a series of interesting chopstick tests, both on Pad A and Pad B, that seemingly tests the limits of their capabilities and their motion. Meanwhile, Pad B is making huge progress, with another important part for it being delivered. And while all of that groundwork is going on, we may be finally inching closer to Starship Flight 9. Why? We'll talk about it. Howdy, Tank Watchers. I'm Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update. I know we all love rocket launches and rocket hardware, but there's a lot of infrastructure that we also need to keep track of that helps make launch day happen. One of those things, funnily enough, is employee housing. There would be no Starship flights without the dedicated workforce here in Starbase. And as such, we've seen an astounding boom in the amount of housing SpaceX has been building here. Southwest of the production site, we see one of these many housing projects. You may remember us talking about this in previous updates. It's a multi-million-dollar development that's supposed to have a restaurant and other amenities, though now it looks like it might just be a whole lot more employee housing. We can see 2 of the buildings already having their main structure, and many more to the right, progressing rapidly in assembly line fashion. It'll be interesting to see how much living space will be available once this is all fully built out. It looks like it's going to be quite a lot. Over at the production site proper, the demise of the high bay is continuing apace. As we can see here, most of the floor below the top level has already been removed at the beginning of the week. We can see that SpaceX is continuing to cut away sections of the walls, probably to make them easier to lift with all the wind here in Starbase. When SpaceX cut away a full section without those cutouts, it began to spin and had to be lowered down inside the high bay itself. So now they've been doing these on each section before cutting it away and lowering it to the ground. I'm certainly not complaining though, because that means we get lots of sparks from all of the torch work. Also, the cutouts are kind of cool looking, especially with the sunset and sunrise lighting. It's like a giant wacky checkerboard in the sky. How long all of this work will take is hard to say, but certainly the high bay's days are numbered at this point. We can already see how the skyline of Starbase, Starline, is changing because of the removal of the high bay. Of course, this will change even more dramatically soon as the Giga Bay rises from the ground. Hear me out though, when Exabay. Some days it's hard to see beloved infrastructure that we followed for so long getting demolished. This is probably what this fence felt like as well, as it fell over next to all the high bay demolition. I think we all kind of feel like that fence some days. Here, we see a load of rubble leaving the production site from that same fence. This is most likely debris removed in the process of foundation work around the area, as SpaceX is revamping the west side of the production site. This isn't a rare thing, by the way. The amount of rubble and secondary transport infrastructure that is needed every day in Boca Chica is insane. Not everything is a fancy ship or booster, but getting waste out and commodities in is equally important. Moving over from the production site to the Massie outpost, we can see SpaceX is preparing the next evolution in Starship testing. Here, SpaceX looks to have completed the modifications on the structural test stand. This is what will be used in the test campaign for Test Tank 17 fairly soon. At least, that's what we hope. Each time SpaceX builds a new wonky test tank, they have to prepare the testing infrastructure to accommodate whatever one-off weird things exist on that tank. As we've talked about in past episodes, this new tank will verify the aft sections of the next generation of booster and is being assembled and readied at the production site right now inside Mega Bay 1. Next to the test stand, a bit further into Massie's, Booster 17 was still hanging out at the beginning of the week after completing 2 cryo tests. With that testing completed and a road delay in place, it was time to roll Booster 17 back to the production site. And indeed, on Tuesday, the booster started to move from Massie's back to Mega Bay 1, where it will undergo engine installation before its static fire campaign. But that might need to wait for a bit. Shortly after the booster arrived, it was turned away again and left the Mega Bay area to be moved to the rocket garden. Here it will remain parked, probably until SpaceX has time to prepare it for static fire. After all, Booster 15 and 16 are currently in preparation for flight campaigns, so it's not unlikely that Booster 17 will not fly before Flight 12 of Starship, as Flight 10 might use 15-2 and Flight 11 might get 16, or vice versa. Only time will tell, but Booster 17 might have a bit of a wait in store before it flies. It's also possible, though I don't know I'd say it's probable, that Booster 17 never flies. If SpaceX is able to get a good number of flights out of used boosters, and the next booster version comes along soon enough, 17 could be skipped. This is total speculation territory here. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm just reminded of vehicles such as Ship 16, Ship 20, Ship 21, Ship 22, Ship 26, Booster 3, Booster 4, Booster 5, Ship 27, Ship 32, Booster 8. You get the point. I hear some of you out there asking, but Jack, why put it into Mega Bay 1 if it's just going to sit at the rocket garden anyway? Why not go from Massie's straight to the garden? Well, some of you seasoned tank watchers out there might know already that during cryo-proof testing, the booster is placed on a thrust simulator stand, which is used as part of that testing. To store or transport a booster, normally you need a transport stand. So the move into Mega Bay 1 was just to lift Booster 17 off of the thrust simulator stand and place it on one of the booster transport stands so it could be rolled out and stored at the rocket garden. This frees up the thrust simulator stand in case they need it for anything else. Or, since the next version of Booster is coming soon, we hope, maybe they'll decommission it and build a new thrust simulator stand to accommodate these new booster designs. In this vein, we can see what looks to be a new thrust sim being built at the Massie outpost, and we can also see the hydraulic rams getting removed from the current thrust simulator, though that's not unprecedented after a round of testing. Due to all the road work around the rocket garden, the booster took the long way into the garden area, getting moved through the Sanchez site and then parked next to the other waiting and retired vehicles. Speaking of the Sanchez lot, let's take a look at one of the stars of the recent week, the launch mount for Pad B and its ongoing construction. We can see good progress on the manifold for the water-cooled top deck. This has been installed for a bit now, but it's certainly interesting to see in such high detail as it gets more completed and SpaceX removes more of the tarps. This manifold will connect to the Deluge farm, which will supply it with the water needed to protect the mount during launch and static fires. In recent weeks, we've seen the paint being ground off some spots on this mount. This appears to be in preparation for some more welding in these areas and may be related to the installation of a second Deluge manifold, although we can't be sure. Overall, if we look at the current status of the launch mount, it seems more and more complete. Still, there's some gaps for more piping to be installed, but with some other progress we've seen this week, it seems the big moment when this thing rolls out is creeping closer and closer. Of course, a big indicator, as we always say, will be the removal of the scaffolding around the mount, as that clears the way for it to be transported. Then, on Friday, we got a big glimpse into the future of Pad B's mount. What we spotted, thanks to our production site cameras, is what looks like one of the legs for the new mount. It makes sense after all. The mount needs to stand on something, as it can't only rest on the walls of the trench and the flame bucket. So these beefy boy legs will be there to do exactly that. Based on the pillar and connector structure on the first level of the mount that we can see right now, we expect 4 such legs to be installed, one on each of the corners of the mount. So if that holds, say goodbye to the mini-leg style mount of Pad A. The leg in question was moved down the road and delivered here to the launch site, where it will most likely be stored until it's placed. Our understanding is that these will be installed and anchored at the pad first, before the mount itself is placed on it. And the fact that they delivered the leg to the launch site instead of the production site is kind of leaning in that direction as well. Although this could always just be for testing and fit checks right now, but either way, we'll keep our eyes on it. Later that night, a second leg was delivered and offloaded, and with that, from what is expected, only 2 legs are now missing. Let's talk about these legs a little bit more. It seems like the bolt patterns on these new legs match the bolt patterns on the pedestals the mount is currently sitting on while it's being built. There is an interesting theory going around about the Pad B mount being removable that we should probably talk about. If you look at a flyover we did a long time ago, thank you for your continued support, by the way, so that we have an archive of footage like this, we can see the construction pedestals for Pad B's mount, and we can see how similar these pedestals are to the legs that were just delivered, especially the area that will connect to the launch mount itself. So what does that mean? First and foremost, the installation of the mount should be relatively straightforward. The 4 legs will be installed first at the launch site and form the installation frame for the mount. The mount will then be rolled from the build site to the launch site and installed in the legs. So it appears that the connections will at least be bolted, but why does that matter? Well, first, this is different from the mount at Pad A, which is just welded straight to the legs. Second, when the mount at Pad B is installed, if SpaceX does not also weld it down after bolting it, then removing and servicing the mount would be an easier task compared to Pad A, where it's basically impossible. It's an interesting theory that you can take to a few different conclusions. The most plausible of them to me is that the mount is just designed to be removable if they ever need to, and it's not an every launch or even a frequent type of thing. I'm thinking it's the type of thing that could be possible to do if the ridge between the flame buckets needs servicing, or if the mount gets severely damaged during a launch and needs to be replaced. You get it. Another interesting thought is if SpaceX comes up with a better design for the mount or a different design for the booster in the future, they could more easily swap in new hardware if it's all merely bolted down instead of being welded directly on. All they need to do is make sure it uses the same bolt patterns as the common docking standard. Think about it like a SpaceX common pad docking adapter. As long as a future updated mount has the same connector, you can remove the old one and attach the new one in the same space. Maybe that new mount can feature hold downs for 35 Raptors or something like that. You get the idea. Of course, it's not as trivial as just popping it out and popping it back in again. It's still a massively complicated process requiring a crane, or more likely multiple cranes, and the lift of a massive object. But it might not be impossible, and that's the whole point. It gives a certain modular aspect to the pad that does not exist with Pad A, which has been Frankenstein refurbished over the years at this point. Of course, all of this is speculation, and we don't know actually what's going to happen with Pad B's mount. It could be bolted and then welded down, and then a lot of this becomes moot. Next, a quick update on the flame diverter, which was a big topic of last week's Starbase update. At the time of last week's recording, SpaceX had installed one of the 2 flame diverter modules inside the flame trench. Well, very late last week, they installed the second one. Similar to the first one, it was hooked up to the crane and then placed inside of the pit in a rather quick maneuver. But don't let the speed of this operation fool you. Just look at the crazy gymnastics this crane is doing. Look at the counterweights. It's like a giant, terrifying balancing act, holding the culmination of thousands of human hours of work over the culmination of thousands of other human hours of work. And they make it look easy. Sorry. I know we're here for rockets, but cranes are cool. Also, remember the unfinished water lines leading from the Deluge farm to Pad B that we spotted on our recent flyover? Remember how we saw the pipes laying right next to the gaps in that plumbing and said, hey, it looks like they might be the perfect fit for those gaps? Well, look what happened. They installed the pipes in those gaps, and with that, only a few more pipes in the Deluge supply line remain to be installed. Over at the Pad B gantry, you can see the installation of all the needed valves, hydraulics, and other GSC that will help support the booster from here. Importantly, these systems have all been moved away from the orbital launch mount to the fixed gantry at the side of the pad. This could be another indicator for a removable launch mount, as moving all of this simplifies the connections between the mount and the pad itself. It could also just be to better protect all of this equipment from getting blasted by a booster during liftoff, or both. Who knows? Before we move our attention to the launch site and launch preparations, it's time to talk about SpaceX's engine testing facility in McGregor, Texas. Here, a new set of tanks, seemingly to supply more commodities for testing, have been delivered to the Raptor test site. Overall, SpaceX is expanding their capability to ramp up Raptor testing, and they'll need to. They already produce a prodigious amount of engines, but even the hundreds of Raptors built already are a paltry sum compared to what will be needed for the many Starship stacks that will get us back to the moon and onto Mars, even when factoring in reuse. In terms of testing, Monday was a rather slow Raptor day, with only one test, but Tuesday made up for it. 7 different Raptor tests were conducted on that day, followed by 3 on Wednesday and 4 on Thursday. Some of these were rather short, but testing also included a 373-second test on Tuesday, a 372-second test on Wednesday, and 2 373-second tests on Thursday. Overall, this means Raptor got about 2,000 seconds of firing time only in the last week at McGregor. SpaceX is generating an insane amount of data with all this testing, and you know what I always say, more data is more better. Here's a friendly reminder that you can enjoy all of this action live every day on our 24/7 McGregor live stream, where the community tracks and measures the Raptor and indeed all the different engine testing there. Thanks to the McGregor crew for that. Okay, it's time for the standard when launch portion of this update. So where are we at in the flow ahead of Starship's 9th flight? Spoiler alert, we're in the middle of pad refurbishment and Starship testing. At the beginning of the week, the launch site was still fairly empty, with both Pad B, of course, not featuring vehicles yet, as well as Pad A, seemingly awaiting vehicles to be ready for testing. The big question now is if SpaceX will roll out Booster 14-2 for the next flight campaign, or if it will try to slide in another booster static fire of, say, Booster 16, which could be possible, before a ship is ready for the next flight. Speaking of Booster 14-2, the booster that's expected to be used on Flight 9 received its crown this week. After some alignment troubles almost worth a montage featuring silly music like yakety sax, the hot staging ring was moved into Mega Bay 1. The hot staging ring was lifted and placed on top of Booster 14 out of the sight of this camera. This makes it nearly ready for flight, as pretty much everything should be closed out at this point. Here's another shot of Booster 14 from the side, where you can see the booster with its crown, as well as the cool scorchy marks from its first flight into space, most likely caused during ship hot staging. Interestingly enough, from this view, we can see some of the gaps inside the hot staging ring are covered. We have no exact idea why this has been done, but this is certainly a new addition. This will be the tower-facing side of the booster, and it's also the raceway area on the booster. So maybe SpaceX wants to make sure that hot exhaust during hot staging does not hit the raceway. It's certainly possible. A few days after this hot staging ring fit check, the hot staging ring was spotted again in the ring yard, which means SpaceX had only performed a quick fit check to see if the ring still fits and then removed it after that. Not that unusual. But just to note that the booster has lost its crown again. But wait, the morning of this recording, it was moved back into the Mega Bay, so cue the silly music, I guess. All of this back and forth is fine though, as the pad can use the time. Over the course of Monday, we saw over 3 hours of Pad A chopstick testing. In this specific testing, we saw the chopstick seemingly rise to catch height and perform a series of wiggles and quick movement tests. This is highly speculative, but it could be that these tests were to verify the chopsticks are ready for an upcoming booster catch, as the movement seems very close to what might be needed to catch a booster. Maybe SpaceX performs some more serious repairs or upgrades between flights and wants to verify these with a test campaign. Who knows? For the record, Pad A is not the only place that saw a lot of chopstick activity this week. On Wednesday, we saw multiple tests of the Pad B chopsticks moving fairly quickly as well. Of course, the Pad B chopsticks are shorter and lighter, so one might be curious if the movement is more fast and efficient on these sticks. Sadly, from the tests we've seen so far, it's hard to tell. On Thursday, the testing on Pad A continued, this time for another long-duration test of the chopsticks, very similar to what we observed on Monday. It seems like SpaceX really wants to verify something on these older sticks ahead of what might be a catch on the next flight. Of course, SpaceX hasn't confirmed a catch on Flight 9 yet, but these tests at least make it seem likely. In a more zoomed-in shot I was able to capture, you can see how the chopsticks wiggle and move in a very precise way during these tests. Some of these movements are very abrupt, while others seem to be more slow. But the main reason why we think such movements are tested are potential catch simulations. It could be that they're just dialing in the chopsticks after some repairs also. I couldn't say, but seems like a catch simulation to me. One question Adrian, the writer of this video, has is if these tests between Pad A and Pad B are related in any way or at all comparable. On Friday, another series of tests was conducted with Pad B. Of course, the sticks were lower on the tower still, but it's interesting that these tests seemingly started on both pads in the same week. Maybe SpaceX is doing tests with both to help dial in Pad B's sticks. Of course, we have no insight into SpaceX's testing, but it would be interesting to know if SpaceX is comparing movement, flex, and maybe bounce rates of both chopsticks to understand the implications of these shorter chopsticks and what exactly they can do. As for Ship 35, the ship we expect to be used for Flight 9, there is good news and bad news. The good news is that on Tuesday, we got to peek inside of Mega Bay 2, in which it is being assembled. The bad news is that the ship is to the left side of the bay, and we can't really see it even with the door open. But that said, there is some very good news about Ship 35 that we were able to capture. One of the big missing pieces it still had is, of course, its Raptor engines. After we saw the installation of aft flaps last week, it only seemed like a matter of time for these engines to appear. And indeed, they appeared. Last week, we reported at least one engine rolling to the ship, but now we can confirm multiple Raptor engines, including Raptor engine number 499. Yes, 499. Were rolled into Mega Bay 2 for installation on the vehicle. Quick refresher here, there are 3 Raptor vacuum engines on a ship and 3 sea-level engines. Of course, we can't always see everything, but based on what we have seen, it's very likely that all 6 engines at this point are present on the ship, and the ship is very close to being complete and ready for static fire and launch. This also means that SpaceX has hopefully closed in on, or even maybe fixed the issues from the last 2 flights. We know these fixes are very much related to plumbing and piping, so hypothetically, it would make sense to not connect the engines while you're still investigating the issue. We'll see if there will be any kind of final validation of any such fixes, with a special static fire featuring an adjusted throttle profile or perhaps duration. Either way, we'll keep our eyes on Ship 35. So, assuming SpaceX will be ready to roll out Ship 35 this week, let's actually talk through what's ready, what's not ready, and what a realistic launch day is. And let's start with the booster. Even though they're playing hot potato with Booster 14-2's hot stage ring, we can check the booster off our list since it's static fired already and probably only needs minor work, if anything, at this point. As for the GSE, or ground support equipment, there is a lot of chopstick testing going on, but that also might just be happening now because SpaceX has the time and not necessarily related to any sort of flight need. We've not seen such a complex testing campaign before every flight, so this could very well be a situation in which SpaceX is just trying to not have infrastructure lay idle while it waits. The most likely bottleneck, and the one that we've been talking about here, if you can't already tell, is Ship 35. Hopefully Ship 35 will roll out to Massie's over the course of the week, but we also thought it might roll out last week, so we'll see. Either way, if it does roll, what does that mean for flight date? For that, let's look at some data. Ship 31, Ship 33, and Ship 34 can be our measurement points. Ship 31 static fired on September 18th and flew on November 19th, so about 60 days later. Ship 33 static fired on December 16th and flew on January 16th, only 30 days later. Ship 34 static fired on February 11th and flew on March 6th, just 25 days later. So SpaceX has been getting faster and faster with ship turnaround between static fire and launch. Let's assume an even faster campaign for Flight 9, say 20 days. Ship 35 hasn't rolled out at the time of this recording and isn't even on the static fire stand, so a static fire before, say, Wednesday seems unlikely. If we add 20 days to that, we land somewhere around May 13th. And I think this is a fair, educated guess, and is generally what I've been telling people when they ask me. The more time passes without 35 rolling out, though, the more likely it is that launch slips from somewhere in mid-May to early June, and frankly, at this point, I'm leaning towards the latter. So what do you think? Will SpaceX be able to squeeze Starship Flight 9 into May, or will they take their time and launch in June? Let us know in the comments. All right, that's it for this week. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget, be excellent to each other.